Welcome to the Social Learning Amplified podcast, the podcast that brings us candid conversations with educators who are finding new ways to engage and motivate their students inside and outside the classroom. Each episode of Social Learning Amplified will give you real-life examples and practical strategies you can put into practice in your own courses. Let's meet today's guest. Thank you for joining us today for this episode on empowering active learning in the Social Learning Amplified podcast series. I'm your host, Eric Mazur, and our guests today are Dr. Sharon Lauricella and Dr. Edmunds. Thank you both for being here today.
It's a pleasure, Eric. Thank you for having us.
Thank you both also for participating in the Perusall book event that ended recently. I'm just so happy to have an opportunity to follow up today and discuss your book, Ludic Pedagogy, A Seriously Fun Way to Teach and Learn. I just love the idea of fun and learning. But before we dive into the book, let me start by telling you a bit about our guest. Sharon Lauricella is the inaugural teaching scholar in residence at Ontario Tech University in Oshawa, Ontario, Canada. She holds a position as full professor in the Faculty of Social Science and Humanities and is a scholar of communication and scholarship of teaching and learning. Sharon holds a doctoral degree from the University of Cambridge. That's not my Cambridge, Massachusetts, but the UK Cambridge. And a BA from Wheaton College, which is actually in Massachusetts, not very far from where I am now. A Canadian with Italian and American roots, Sharon will always cheer for the Red Sox and hope that our listeners won't hold that against her. I certainly won't, Sharon. She's been recognized for teaching excellence, having been awarded the Ontario Tech Teaching Award twice in 2007 and in 2012. The Faculty Teaching Award also twice, 2010 and 2019, and the Tim McTiernan Student Mentorship Award in 2020. She loves being a faculty member, not least because it's way easier than being in graduate school. That was hard. Edmunds holds degrees in psychology, rural development, rural studies, and business, and tells me that he has yet to determine the definite scholarly trajectory, which I'm sure is a good thing. After being awarded a PhD from the University of Guelph and an MBA from Laurentian University, he joined Brandon University in Canada as an assistant professor of business administration. Together, Sharon and Keith wrote the book on Ludic Pedagogy, published by Rowman and Littlefield in March last year. I love, I already mentioned this, how your book advocates for having fun and positive experiences in the college classroom, and how fun and learning need not be mutually exclusive. In fact, I have tried very hard to make the learning more fun for my own students. About 10 years ago, just to give you a little background there, I started a completely team and project-based course to teach introductory physics to pre-meds and engineering students who typically don't want to learn physics. And the project was really there to promote intrinsic motivation, to give a sort of a higher goal to the learning, right? So it was not just the abstract learning goal of learning physics, but a more interesting goal of doing a project. And I tried to add to the projects a component of social good or empathy. And the students are having fun. I wish I could show you a picture of the students in the class, but they're having actually fun learning. And I remember from, you can see them with smiles in the classroom. And I remember the very first year that we taught this, when the course was still an unknown on campus with 35 students. Meanwhile, it's grown to 160, but it's another story. I remember that about 2 weeks into the semester, a number of students came to me and they said, we're having a lot of fun, but we don't think that we're learning anything. In their mind, having fun meant you couldn't really be learning, because typically when you're learning, you're under stress,
Mhm.
you're cramming, right? And the fact that they were freed of that feeling of stress told them, no, I'm not learning. Now, I'd like to get back to that later on in this conversation. But before, since we may have many listeners who are not familiar with your book, could you explain what you mean by ludic pedagogy? Or actually the model that you promote in your book?
Sure. The idea of the ludic pedagogy model, it's based on the idea that, if similar to what you were talking about, if we enjoy ourselves, um, but in our case, starting with the instructor, if we enjoy ourselves while we're teaching, and if students can enjoy themselves while they're learning, then the learning is going to be more effective. Students want to be there and they want to learn. So the model's sort of built on four pillars. The first one is fun, and that's your intrinsic motivator, right? The thing that gets students to want to come to class, to participate, to learn, right? It's not the grade at the end; it's the fun that they're having. So that's the motivator. Play is the activity pillar of the model, and that's the things that we do in class. It's not the traditional sage on the stage or the chalk and talk. That students, that's a really passive kind of learning for students. Play is, we've often said it's active learning because that tends to be more politically correct in the university, right? If I'm doing active learning, that's okay, but if I'm playing in the classroom, that might not be okay. So play, we can roughly equate with active learning. And it's, again, it's the things that students do as part of their learning. The third pillar is the playfulness, and that's the attitude. And that's the way that both students and faculty approach the course. It incorporates ideas like creativity and curiosity, having a sense of humor, being fun loving, those kinds of ideas. It's the attitude that we bring. Um, it's and I want to clarify this early on because it's often some pushback that we get on this model. It's not silliness for silliness' sake. It's about being willing to play, because play without playfulness becomes a chore. So if we're going to have students play, there has to be a sense of playfulness. Otherwise, it's a task. It's just something else they're doing. And then the last pillar is positivity, and that's the affect. Um, and for the people that are, you know, developmental psychologists, they're not going to like what I say here. We're going to equate affect with emotions here. It's the emotional bent of the model, um, and it's about looking at the course contents through a positive lens. It's seeking to understand, it's seeking to empathize, it's having a solutions orientation, those kinds of things. And it's important to make a distinction between this positivity pillar and just being happy, because there's lots of course content that might be covered that's, you don't want to be happy when you're talking about genocide or uh, race relations, or sexual harassment, all sorts of terrible things that get covered in university courses. We're not saying be happy when you're talking about it, but if you can approach it with, that solutions orientation, that empathy, that sense of understanding, that's what we mean by positivity. And in a nutshell, that's ludic pedagogy: fun, play, playfulness, and positivity.
Great. So I would like to perhaps add to that by asking you two sort of follow-up questions. One is, how how did you two create this model? But also, what are some specific examples? How can we make it a little bit less abstract for our listeners?
Sure, I can take that, Eric. The question about how we created the model, and that's actually a fun story. In fact, Keith and I actually met on Twitter. Like, this is when Twitter was cool, when Twitter was still the place to be before it kind of caught on fire and and became a cesspool. But these were the cool days of Twitter, and it was 2020. The pandemic was raging. And in the summer of 2020, what Keith tells me is he was hanging out in his backyard reading books, as academics do. And, this was after the whole emergency online teaching where everyone was just scrambling to move everything online, and it was kind of like a stopgap period. And we were edging into the time where a lot of classes were going to be online, and we actually had to know what we were doing. There was no more excuse of like, oh, we're in panic mode. So everyone was talking about all this new technology and this new tool and that new tool and this new way of doing things, and how about this and how about that, which was really helpful and good. But Keith threw out this tweet that said, I wonder if anyone has thought about any of these tools or techniques and how much fun they're going to be. And the stars must have aligned, because I ended up seeing that tweet and I called it the best tweet ever. And from there, Keith and I became friends. We direct messaged. We met on Zoom, and then I became friends with his wife. And now Keith is coming to my wedding this summer, and it's a whole thing. So, it all started through social media, but we had this idea that we're stopgapping all of this teaching with the latest and greatest tool and the shiny thing, and the pedagogy needs to come first. So we kind of bonded over that, and then we said, what do we need more of in this dark time when we're all really doing our best? Students are doing our best, faculty's doing our best, staff is doing their best. So what did we need? And we talked extensively about how we could make this better, and fun and play and playfulness, positivity, all kind of aligned for us. And then we said, okay, let's make sense of this, and we created the model from there.
I see. And it'd be great to have one concrete example of something you have each done in your classes, the old way and the new fun way.
Sure.
Well, I don't know about the old way, because
You've always been fun.
I've always been fun. The one example that I most often use in my classes is my negotiations class. So I teach in business, and negotiations is a skill that a lot of students need to have. And so I do a lot of role plays. It's an integral element of the course. I teach the concept in the first half of the class, and the second half of the class, they essentially practice it. They're given a scenario, they're given their roles, and even in the simple ones, you're buying a car, you're selling the car, here's the information you have. Students have a lot of fun with that, and they really get into their roles. And then there's some that are a little bit more out there. In the lesson about how to deal with cross-cultural issues, for example, it would be really problematic to assign somebody a cultural role for a culture they don't belong to, right? We would get into all sorts of issues that would get me hauled in front of HR, and it would just be problematic in all sorts of ways. So what I do is I have a role play where they play different alien races. And so they're buying and selling a spaceship, and they're given the characteristics of their alien's culture. And it's quite different from anything that the students are familiar with. And so they're given this in advance. And so when they come into class, students have no idea what's going on, which is kind of the point, because they're dealing with a culture that they're unfamiliar with. They think they understand, but they're given false information. And so, I had student look at me the last time we did this, and pleading in his eyes, like, how do I make this person understand without describing my culture? And that's not something that most of us are able to do anyway. So it's lots of fun. And students, I hear years after that they've graduated, that's the course they remember, because it was fun. It's stuff that they did.
Mm-hmm.
And so that's a concrete example of play. And I can give you another one, and it's a very small example, but it serves an important purpose, is Monday through Thursday, I wear a tie to work. Um, but it's always a novelty tie. It has cartoon characters or, the Mona Lisa on it. It's never just a regular patterned tie. But
Mhm.
the important thing is that it serves as an indication of my playfulness, right? So because I'm wearing a tie, that's an indication of my source of power and I'm the guy in charge. But because it's a silly tie, it and I don't draw explicit attention to it, but it allows students to recognize that I do have that willingness to have levity and have fun in class.
Great.
I can give you an example actually of what I'm going to do Monday. And it's something that we're gonna do right in class. This is a really contemporary example for you. I teach a course in communication and conflict because I'm in communication and digital media studies. So we're talking about communication and conflict, and one of the things we're going to talk about on Monday is how to navigate when you get frustrated. And this kind of is a direct follow on to Keith's story. But there are a variety of ways that students might say they respond to being frustrated. But one of the things that we're going to do on Monday is I'm going to ask all my students to fold a paper crane. So I have origami paper. Everyone's going to get a paper crane, a piece of origami paper, and then they can fold the paper crane in any way they want. They can go on YouTube and follow directions. They can look at still instructions. They can even work with somebody else in a group on YouTube or in a group with a still or a group. They can work with someone who knows how to do it, and that person can show them, but the student actually has to fold it themselves. So students love this exercise because it moves from the theoretical to the practical, right? Like, oh, I would do this or I would do that, but then you're faced with doing something that you're not familiar with. And like, what? I don't know what to do here. And so what are your help seeking strategies? How do you deal with your own confusion? These kinds of things. And the thing I love about this exercise too is that it gets students moving around. They're not just stuck in one spot. So they might move their computer to sit with somebody else. They'll switch spots in the room. They'll get up and sit beside somebody that might help them. So this exercise we're going to do on Monday, and I'm so excited to do it because I find that what students always do is they save that crane. And I've had messages from students like a decade later saying, I got a new job. Here's my paper crane up on my bulletin board. So that makes it really fun too.
I I I bet that sounds like a lot of fun. Now, how have you talked about some student reactions, but as I alluded to earlier, sometimes students, connect learning with suffering rather than learning with
Yeah.
fun. So how have they been reacting more generally? Also, I could see some students in your class, Keys, feeling pushed a little bit out of their comfort zone, right? Because they need to enact. I mean, they might not be willing to even sort of step into the limelight and act like an alien selling a spaceship. Um, so, does this work for all students? Are there some students who resist this and feel uncomfortable?
Yes, absolutely, and the same kind of thing happens in my leadership class. I part of the class is students are expected to enact the role of a leader at some point in the course. And in a lot of those things, for the more introverted students, for example, they feel, I don't want to say put upon, but pushed out of their comfort zone, certainly, to do those kinds of things. But it's in the very first class I say, you can't learn these things just by me talking about them. I could teach it. I could teach you about negotiations. I could teach you about leadership. But unless you actually engage in the activity, you're not going to internalize it. It's not going to become a skill that you can grow and use. And I've never had a student drop the class after that warning right at the start. And by the end, they'll recognize that, yes, I could have tried harder, put myself more into the role, but they're always taking something useful away from those lessons.
Mhm.
Yeah, I mean that what you just said, Keith, is so true for any form of active learning, right? I mean, for any form of learning, really in general, learning is not a spectator sport. You have to roll up your sleeve and do things, and it's keeps surprising me even after for more than 30 years I've been having beaten the drum of active learning, how difficult it is to unseat this notion that in college you learn by listening, not by doing. It's like moving a mountain. Now we've mainly focused on the students, but it seems that you too are having more fun in class.
We sure are. I absolutely am. I look forward to going to school every day. I look forward to seeing what's going to happen. And I can tell you a story, Eric, about what happened when I first started using Perusall. And it was years ago because I've been using it for a number of years now. And I remember telling students that we were going to use this platform that's going to make reading more social and interactive. And I had never used it before, but I hadn't told them that yet. And I said, has anyone used Perusall? No hands, no nothing. And so I thought, okay, I had a split second in my mind. I wasn't going to be like, okay, well, this is how it works. And the first thing I actually said was, okay, this is awesome because I haven't used it either. We're going to figure this out together. And then it was just like it, and then everyone started laughing. And I was just like, okay, this is where we need to be. We need to be on this level where the instructor is not the omniscient one, and learning, as you say, is not a passive thing for me or for my students. So in that moment, I thought, okay, I've got this kind of interlude where I can connect with students and say, I'm exactly like you. We are all going to figure this out together. And what I had a lot to figure out, they had a lot to figure out. And toward the end of the term, we did it. And it was such a great experience because, I let go of that, oh, I have to know what I'm doing thing. And I said, okay, perfect. Nobody knows what they're doing. Awesome. This is the best.
In case you too seem to be having a lot of fun in your classes.
Yeah, I mean, as I tell my students, life's too short to work a job you hate. So if I wasn't having fun, it'd be time to find another career.
And you find that creating an environment, a more fun learning environment for your students, brings back that happiness and fun to yourself too.
I think so. I come at it the other way. I think if I'm having fun, the students are more likely to have fun.
I
You
see.
can't make it fun for the students if you're not having fun yourself.
I see. So is having, I'm sure that by now many listeners are thinking, how can I have more fun in the classroom? So is this something that, requires sort of an innate skill, or is this something that you can actually learn? How to be fun?
Me?
Go ahead.
Take that one. I think it's actually a little bit of both. I think you have to have a little bit of a fun heart. And quite frankly, I don't know anyone who doesn't, right? Everyone's got a little bit of that funness in them, or, people I hang out with anyway. So I think you can learn it though. And I think now that I'm reflecting on this question, I think the early part of my career, some of my fun was quashed, right? Like I went to University of Cambridge in England, very intense graduate experience where it was very narrow, and you had to do the right thing in the right way. And then started a tenure stream position where I had to jump through all the hoops. And then once I became associate professor, it had already, I'd already been conditioned. And then it was only then that I started thinking, wait, I actually can do things a little bit differently. I don't have to do it the way I've been taught. I don't have to teach the way I've always been a student, right? So there were a few things, a few key things that I did initially that I still do. And one of them is pretty much every 30 minutes, if students have been sitting in the same spot, I do something so that they move around. And it sounds really simple, but it gives you the bandwidth to do something a little bit different, an activity, ask a question, ask students to talk to each other by moving around the room, these kinds of things. So I look at my prep for the day and I think, okay, if students are going to be sitting in the same spot for more than 30 minutes, we've got to get them moving around.
I see. I see. Um, as we're sort of approaching the end of this episode here, what advice would you give to people who are contemplating right now? How can I incorporate fun into my classes? Sort of what kind of simple one thing that might help them over the threshold?
Very easy. Try something, anything. And if it works, great. Refine it in the next iteration. If it doesn't work, refine it in the next iteration. And it can be an activity. It can be a joke at the start of class. It doesn't matter. Just something in one of those four pillars: fun, play, playfulness, and positivity. Just try something, and that's the thin edge of the wedge.
Nice.
Sharon, do you have something to add there?
Sure. I think, some people, when they're learning about our model, think that you have to have fun, play, playfulness, and positivity all at the same time, but you don't. You can just take one of those aspects and weave it into your lesson plan or a reading or any kind of event or material that you have in class. And I think the moving every 30 minutes is key. And the other thing I think that is really fun is to try new technology. I use new technology all the time. I've tried Figma. I started with Perusall. I've stuck with it. I've tried Mentimeter, anything, and students will be like, "You're always trying something new." And somebody said that to me last week, and I said, "Well, yeah, isn't it fun?" And that's part of how students learn. When they get to work, they're going to always be trying new technology, and it trains your mind to learn new things quickly. So I'm always trying new crazy things, and I think if I model that, students are more open to do it themselves.
So let me end with one sort of reflection that I have here. Um, I once invited a game designer to a series of talks that we give in education at the School of Engineering, where I'm on the faculty, because I was hoping to learn more about gaming and fun. I mean, the two are related in, and but how you could incorporate game design into learning. And one of the very first questions that this person who was from the D school at Stanford, if I recall correctly, said surprised me tremendously. She asked actually, you know, what is it that makes games so addictive? And most people had a lot of trouble articulating their ideas there. And she said, what it is, and this is one of the most basic design principles of game design, is you want to add the learning of a skill. It's the learning that makes the gaming fun,
Mm.
right? You want to challenge people to learn something in order to get to a next level, and then offer a reward for that learning. And I was thinking, gee, I'm inviting this person, to see how I can build in gaming and fun into learning. and she's telling me that gaming is fun because of the learning. So there's some kind of very tight connection between learning, fun, and gaming. And as we know, if you observe small children, they love to learn. We're born sort of wanting to learn, and the learning is fun. And then we go through education, and the fun gets beaten out of the learning.
Mhm.
And it only becomes fun again once we complete our formal education and engage in a lifelong learning and learn only for fun. So
Mhm.
it's kind of a strange cycle. And I'm so happy to hear the two of you speak about bringing the fun back into the learning in the college classroom. So before we conclude here, what are you working on next?
Well, because the book we've been talking about, the Ludic Pedagogy book, is very much the what and the why of our model. We're starting to work on a workbook that will help people with the how. So how do I take this model and apply it to my class in chemical engineering or accounting or music theory or whatever it is? How do I take this model and apply it to my course? And so the workbook will be a step-by-step working through how you can incorporate fun, play, playfulness, and positivity into your course, regardless of what it is.
Absolutely. And we also are available to run workshops. We do hour-long online or a day-long or a half a day, where if people, for teaching learning centers, if people really want to take a deep dive into this, we're here for it. We can model the whole thing.
That's wonderful. So I would like to conclude by thanking you for listening to this podcast and thanking our guests, Sharon Lauricella and Keith Edmunds. Thank you for joining us.
Thanks for having us. It was fun.
Thanks again, Eric.
Their book, Ludic Pedagogy, a seriously fun way to teach and learn, is available from the publisher, and Sharon and Keith told me that they might run another Perusall book event in the summer of 2023. Fingers crossed that you'll say yes to that. Now, for those of you who have not yet joined such an event, Perusall book events are author-facilitated events where for a nominal fee you get access to the book that is the subject of that Perusall book event. But at the same time, you'll be reading and interacting with other like-minded educators like me, as well as the authors through the Perusall interface. So I hope you will be joining the brainstorming on how to make learning fun. And to learn more about these events, go to perusall.com/engage. Finally, you can find our Social Learning Amplified podcast and more on perusall.com, Social Learning Amplified, altogether one word. Subscribe to find out about other episodes, and I hope to welcome you back on a future one. Social Learning Amplified is sponsored by Perusall, the social learning platform that motivates students by increasing engagement, driving collaboration, and building community through your favorite course content. To learn more, join us at one of our introductory webinars. Visit perusall.com to learn more and register.